Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Here's what we do in the radio industry. As you come back live, sometimes you talk a bunch of nonsense so people can rejoin the stream. That's what I'm about to do. If you just lost us here, the state of Tennessee in the Senate, Tori just went over this, but there's a version of a constitutional amendment that would give us a right to work state in Tennessee. Now, that's still a little bit of ways off, but we are making moves actively to
Not give
become.
us the right to work state, enshrine right to work in our Constitution. We have been a right to work state. It's part of the reason that Tennessee is one of the best performing states, even throughout this pandemic.
The right to work stuff. We were enshrined in the Constitution. And I'm telling you, the PRO Act is something that's not just going to threaten that in Tennessee. It's something that's going to be threatening that in the entire state. In the entire United States as well. Again, moving into those state issues then out of the right to work stuff, out of the PRO Act, which again just passed the federal House here. If you missed this before, Tori went on this fantastic rant, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask her to do it yet one more time. But let's go over some of the stuff that happened in this last week in the state legislature here in Tennessee, starting with House Bill 43. Now, House Bill 43 was brought by Chairman Faison, and it's an issue that has been pinging back and forth for several weeks out there in that building. And frankly, Tori, I'm going to let you go on and explain what you just said a second ago, but going into this week, I did not expect that to be the most controversial bill of the week, possibly even the session so far. But give everyone a quick rundown as to what that bill is, what it does, and a little bit of what happened in subcommittee.
The shorthand version, I'm calling it the warrantless surveillance bill, right? And so apparently in the state of Tennessee, there have been some law enforcement agencies that have placed surveillance cameras on people's private property without a warrant or consent. Now, there's actually a case working its way all the way up to the Tennessee Supreme Court right now. And this has a lot to do with open fields doctrine and whether or not they can actually place surveillance on your property. But our Tennessee Constitution actually grants us more protections than just the Fourth Amendment does. So here we are, and we have a bill that when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, we shouldn't really need that. I mean, we've got Fourth Amendment protections. Why should we need to say that you have to have a warrant to put surveillance equipment on someone's property? But apparently it's a thing. So we had talked to all the committee members prior to going into the criminal justice subcommittee. And, we had all of our votes lined up and there was no opposition to it, because everyone was saying that they don't do this. That this is not a common practice, that they would easily, they could get a warrant if they needed a warrant. So they would get a warrant. They wouldn't just go put cameras on people's property. So no one was saying that this was a common practice. And then we get kind of, frankly, blindsided in committee when the DA's conference decided they wanted to get up and speak against the bill. First off, I don't think that they had the amendment. So I don't think that they even had the final version, the same version that we were all looking at, right? Because the amendment is a little bit broader than even the first one. So they can't place a warrant, not a warrant. They can't place a camera on your property without a warrant unless it's a judicially recognized exception, I believe.
Yeah.
And then they also made a contingency saying that they could still use privately operated cameras. So like if I have a Ring doorbell and the police want to, someone breaks into my neighbor's house across the way and the police want to see if they can use that footage from my property focused at someone else's property to help stop a crime, that would be okay. And also it wouldn't prevent them from admitting body camera footage.
Body cameras, right.
So, we felt like it cleaned it up enough. There was no question of what we were trying to do. Basically, Tennesseans are secure in their own private property, and you should not be placing surveillance equipment on people's property without a warrant, period. Easy stuff. The DA spoke against it and gave like this worst case scenario of how we could possibly be letting criminals or drug dealers go free. But I go back to this, they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. One, that they don't do it without a warrant. And then two, saying that we should give up this liberty just in case someone might commit a crime, that, this could get it thrown out if they don't have a warrant. they should be doing their job. They should have a warrant in the first place. They should have a justifiable reason that they think someone is committing a crime on their own property before they even before they go set up cameras on someone's property. It to me, it's the craziest thing, but property rights are a foundational aspect of what it is to be in a free society. And you cannot, as the bill sponsor said, you cannot have a surveillance state and a free state. Those two things do not work together. So you can choose to have a free state or you can choose to have a surveillance state, but we're not going to have both.
Yeah, and let me lose this time a little bit just to thank everyone that watches this little update, that watched the video that was put out on AFP Tennessee page last week of describing what House Bill 43 was, of those that took action to click that little button and send an email, to call a legislator, to write their own email, to show up in the legislature and speak to some of these people, because it is an issue just like this, Tori, one that seems to be axiomatic. I mean, on prima facie, on its face, seems to be something that just makes sense. It's common sense. You need a warrant before you come on private property to put up a camera to film me. I don't know who would oppose that, but it is these types of things where they say the devil's in the details. And I truly believe, Tori, if it were not for some of the movement and involvement and interaction from y'all, all of y'all watching this, to sign that petition and get that message out there, several of these committee members would not have said what they said during subcommittee, would not have voted the way, and would not have spoke up to try and support something like this. And to Tori's point here, let me just get back here in just a second. I want to give a quick taste as to what the chairman said at the very end of this subcommittee. A little bit of what Tori just spoke about, saying a surveillance state is not a free state. We are a constitutional republic. Okay, we need to be able to balance these properly. Listen to Chairman Faison here at the end of the subcommittee, defending his own bill.
Any other questions? That objection, we're going to go back in session. We're now back in session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Committee, if you'll give me 2 minutes, let me give you some intent. I'd like to start out by first saying that my family is a huge fan of law enforcement, all law enforcement in Tennessee, whether it's the TWRA, local police, and I'm a huge fan of our DAs. My DA at home is one of my closest friends, and I love him. That's my 16-year-old son right there. I've told him, if you ever stop by police, you respect them. Whatever they say, you do it. I'm a huge fan of them, number one. I back the blue, and my family backs the blue. But committee, you need to understand something about me. I also back the U.S. Constitution and the safety thereof. In his speech, he said, I'm worried about the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm worried about the future too. What was totally unacceptable and shunned 15 years ago in society is widely accepted and celebrated today. We change our emotions and our thoughts constantly, and who knows what will happen 15 years from now and what will be illegal. So I will say this. He brought up all the stuff about a guy going into for a drug bust. My intent of this bill is to be so limited. I actually put this in the bill, so limited that this is if you affix a device and put it on somebody's private property, you have to have a warrant. I actually have in the bill, and Representative Russell brought it up. If you come down to Section C, this section does not limit the admissibility or gathering of evidence obtained from privately controlled monitoring devices or equipment worn by law enforcement officers or installed on law enforcement motor vehicles. The entire thing you just heard, all the scenarios don't match what's going on in this bill. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill, the intent of this bill is to stop law enforcement from putting on a camera to take pictures from a person's private property unless they go through an elected official. That's all the intent this is. And we've limited other things to keep what the scenarios you heard from the gentleman from Henry County and from my good friend, the DA. We've taken care of that in this bill. So I believe we're doing right. We're staying on point with the Fourth Amendment and recognizing that people's private property, they have a right of reasonable expectation of privacy where they live.
There you go. Actually, absolutely. And I wanted to play the full 2 minutes of that primarily, Tori, because now that this is out of sub, it's going to be going on to the full Criminal Justice Committee. And again, when you're watching this right now, if you're watching this currently live, if you're watching this back later, the Evernote link, you will find a link in those Evernote links, the notes there, and it will be entitled "Protect Tennessee's Constitutional Rights, Require a Warrant Before Surveillance." If you click that link, sign it, it will go to the entirety of the Criminal Justice full committee there before that comes up next week. And I'm telling you, as much of a problem as it had during subcommittee there, not a problem necessarily, Tori, but I think we will still need a bit more movement on that. And I just want to give you from the horse's mouth, so to speak, what Representative Faison intended with this bill, what it hopes to do, and the very simple constitutional problem that it hopes to solve. Just for sake of time here, though, Tori, let's move on to a few of the things that passed this last week. Quick rundown on House Bill 141, the Hollywood handout bill. That's still moving around in the House, Tori, I believe.
It's still moving. It's going to be on the House floor on the 15th. What day is that? Is that Monday? I believe it is Monday night.
Yeah.
So it will already be on the House floor. We had a couple of members that stood up for taxpayers and said, no, thank you. And, I could go on down the whole road once again, of why Hollywood handouts are bad, or why we shouldn't give our tax dollars over for crony development ideas, because really it comes down to politically connected companies are going to get these dollars. And when you take the tax dollars away and give them to a private company, you're not going to be funding the essential government services you should be funding. So we actually got a couple of no votes in that first committee. I would like to especially say thank you to Representative Jerry Sexton. He definitely spoke up on behalf of taxpayers. And, one thing that as they were moving this bill very quickly through the finance committees, many of the members did not even know that it also includes a sales tax exemption. And why this is important is Tennessee, most of our revenue, 2/3 of our state revenue is generated through the sales tax. And it's also what put Tennessee in the top 7 states that are actually coming out ahead through this pandemic, because we have decided as a state that we will tax when you purchase something, not when you produce something, not when you earn your income. We try not to tax income at all. We actually passed a constitutional amendment some years back to ban the income tax in Tennessee. But the sales tax is one of those things that, there's some sales tax exemptions out there. There's a certain for sales tax exemptions for agriculture. There's some for funeral services, because who wants to pay sales tax when you're having to deal with the death of a loved one also, right? So there's a few other sales tax exemptions out there, but this is for the entire film and entertainment industry. And so all they would have to do is apply. They would submit this application. The Commissioner of Economic and Community Development or Finance and Administration could grant them a sales tax exemption that's good for 2 years. And that is $1.3 million in foregone state revenue. So that's $1.3 million in just the tax revenue that they expect to lose from passing this bill. And I know in the grand scheme of things, 1.3 million isn't actually a lot of money. But still, this moves the timeline up for when they're either going to look at A, raising our sales tax again, or B, broadening the base, which would mean that they would have to go back and look at all the exemptions in the sales tax, which probably should be done. And someone's going to have to be the bad guy and tell all these people that they don't get the sales tax exemption anymore. So, as long as Tennesseans are still paying sales tax, and you have to pay it for anything for your food at the grocery store, do you think that it's appropriate for your tax dollars to go to a private company that shouldn't have to pay sales tax? It's not right. That's what makes sales tax fair, is everybody pays it until you start granting exemptions.
And granting exemptions to those particular people, right? And again, just to let y'all know how easy it is to make your voice heard on this, you're seeing a Facebook Live screen right now. See where my mouse is over here to the right? If you literally click on that Evernote link, it'll bring up the page that looks just like this, okay? Scroll down. That's a PRO Act social media toolkit. This is Reform Civil Asset Forfeiture Laws. This one right here, okay? Protect Tennessee's economy from special interest groups. If you click on this link, goes right here. You can read more about it. You can fill out your information right there. Send that letter to your lawmakers. We desperately need that help as this works through the House. Yeah, it's also in the comments right now. David's actually put in the comments of this Facebook video as well. Tori, moving on to a couple other bills here that just went through. A point of clarification for myself. So House Bill 59 is a bill that we've been following for a little bit. It deals with civil asset forfeiture. There's a $350 bond that's attached to those court proceedings. One of only 3 states in the nation that requires that $350 per charge. And House Bill 519. Now, 519 is the professional privilege tax. Right now, there's 7 different professions that are still left in there. Say it again.
7 remaining professions.
7 remaining professions, $400 per year. And the idea for a very long time is that this has been the last vestige of the income tax left around. It was only meant to be temporary. Both of those bills, 59 got out of Civil Justice Full Committee, and 519, they both went to Finance, Ways and Means Full, and were both placed behind the budget. Now, admittedly, this is a term that I'm still somewhat discovering. Tori, could you tell our people, is this good? Is it bad? What does it mean to be placed behind the budget? Where are we sitting with those 2 bills?
It means we're waiting. Okay. So the governor has to give his budget to the legislature. So that's step 1. And so the lawmakers can reach out to the governor and ask for their, if there's any cost to be included in the state budget. They also have a budget amendment process that we go through after they pass the budget. So here's the thing. If you want to get rid of civil asset forfeiture, House Bill 59, especially getting rid of the bond, it's a $384,000 is how much they say it will cost to not collect that $350 if someone is challenging to get their own property back without being charged with it without it being tied to a criminal case. So we obviously were one of 3 states that even charges a bond to have your day in court, to be heard, to try and get your own property back. We absolutely would want to see that be included in the budget. So I've reached out as Americans for Prosperity. I would encourage you to reach out even to the governor's office. If there is a bill that you are really passionate about, reach out to the constituent services person for the governor or directly to the governor's office and say, hey, this is really important. Please consider funding it in the budget. Tennessee is a fiscally conservative state. So this is why anything that costs money or decreases revenue goes behind the budget until they look at all the numbers. They get all the numbers to come in, and why Tennessee also has a balanced budget. And then they look at how much they have left over. But typically, even after they pass the budget, there's typically anywhere between $10 and $15 million that's set aside to enact the legislation that's passed through the General Assembly. So that's when the budget amendment process comes in. So once the budget has been passed, if you're not lucky enough to get your favorite piece of legislation covered in the budget, if there is any kind of a fiscal cost to it, then there's the budget amendment process. And so this is when all the legislators, because they all have different things that are important to them, they would each, they try and gather enough support to get the funding for that, whatever the bill is. They try and get enough support to get that piece funded in the budget amendment process. And that happens at the end of session, and it is madness.
It is madness. You'll see David put the links, by the way, to the civil asset forfeiture, to the Hollywood handout petitions that you can sign, send a letter directly to your legislator. Let us know how you feel about that as well. I mean, even if you're watching this back later on YouTube or Facebook, comment in here. We can actually see when you comment on these videos after the fact. We'd love to go back and interact with y'all, or send us direct messages. Send me a direct message on Facebook, Grant Henry, send David Thompson a message, send a message here to Americans for Prosperity Tennessee. I'd love to get to know y'all more, see where you're at. Let's go grab some lunch together or something. Moving into next week, Tori. So last week we had House Bill 43, the warrantless surveillance situation, House Bill 141, the Hollywood handout bill still moving around, House Bill 59, that's the $350 bond attached to civil asset forfeiture proceedings, and House Bill 519, that's the professional privilege tax of $400 per individual to have the privilege to do business here in Tennessee. All those happened last week. Coming up this next week, though. Go ahead, sorry.
One more thing on the professional privilege tax.
Yeah.
Years gone by, I think it was in the 2000s, when they were actually considering passing an income tax in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
The professional privilege tax was passed was passed then at $400 as a fix to the budget, to balance the budget, because there was so little funding in the budget then that they were going to have to make some serious cuts to government services. They needed to find some revenue somewhere, and they didn't want to raise taxes on everybody. So they selected about 23 different professions that they thought made enough money to pay that extra $400 for the sake of doing business. And, why this is bad is a lot, some of these are healthcare providers also. And so a lot of folks or attorneys, they would keep their license active just to do pro bono or charity work. But then they would have to pay, they would still have to pay the $400 just for the privilege of working in this certain profession. We've banned the income tax constitutionally, but yet this privilege tax of working keeps hanging on, and we would really like to get rid of it. Whether it's a phase out, like we got rid of the hall tax through a phase out of cutting it year by year, or a flat repeal. We know that the money is there in the budget, and we're very hopeful that we can finally do away with it. And it would make our state an even more business-friendly place and a better place to own a business.
You said a second ago, speaking of professional privilege tax, some of these people are healthcare workers, right? That's moving into next week's bills here. Let's talk about one bill in particular, House Bill 2, carried by Robin Smith in the House over there. This bill intends to deal with, let's just call it surprise medical billing, right? And Tori will have a little bit better breakdown as to what this means. But let me just give sort of an anecdote from my personal life that I've been telling some of these legislators, because I think it helps drive home what this bill intends to address. House Bill 2 coming up next week in Insurance Subcommittee. That'll be on March 16th. So my father, he's a nuclear engineer in Oak Ridge area. And, if he were to run into a financial situation, given the income he makes, he would probably be okay. All right. That's important for the rest of this story. He went to go get an MRI done or CT or whatever it is that you get done before you have rotator cuff surgery. It was just a scan, literally, just to see where everything was so the surgeon can have that information going forward. And my father, trying to be somewhat, fiscally responsible, I suppose, shops around a little bit in the Knoxville area. He checks this area and he checks this area, and he eventually decides on Tenova to do this scan for him. And he gets in writing, in 2 different areas, a $1,298 quote. I mean, literally, email comes through, paper-driven draft. He signs the bottom of it. $1,298 just for the scan, just for the imaging done itself prior to the surgery. Now, you all can tell where the story's about to go. 3 weeks later, after the surgery has been done, again, keep in mind, I'm talking about the imaging only. That $1,200 bill shows up in the mail for $11,000. We're talking about a 1,000% increase from $1,298 to a little over $11,000. Now, for someone like my father, who's a nuclear engineer, he had to spend 6 months to whittle that backwards from $11,000 all the way down to something like $2,000 or $3,000. Again, for someone like him, it may be okay to spend that amount of time to be able to pay incrementally, to be able to have that much stored away. For almost everyone else in this state, a story like that would be absolutely devastating. It would be dire. It would decimate some people. They just wouldn't be able to pay. Now, to what extent Robin Smith's bill intends to address situations like this, I'm not quite sure, if I'm being totally honest with y'all. I just know these are the stories that you continually hear more and more and more of. But we met with Robin Smith just yesterday, correct, Tori? And she explained that this intends to address in 2 different areas. So if you could, Tori, give me a quick breakdown as to what this surprise medical billing intends to do here.
You said yesterday, and frankly, it's session. All of my days are running together. I think
That's right.
So her bill addresses 2 different paths, right? So you have 2 different situations. One, if you, a lot of these surprise bills are triggered when someone that's giving you care, say one person or one facility, someone in this factor ends up being out of network. And that's where the surprise part of the billing can come in, because you'll often get the estimate based off of your in-network benefits, and then through health insurance. And then you will find out, like, maybe your anesthesiologist wasn't in network, and that's what will trigger this really high bill. So there's 2 different paths that Robbins tries to address, and it really addresses more so for those smaller health plans for like small business owners. So it doesn't touch Medicare or Medicaid. It's really the smaller insurance plans. So one path is say you're in an emergency situation, you're having a heart attack, you cut off your arm, you got in a car wreck, whatever it is, like a true emergency situation. If you end up in a facility that is not in network, that provides a path to figure out it, to get to some resolution on what that middle point of the bill, what a reasonable cost for that bill should be, because it's not really any fault of your own if you end up somewhere in an emergency situation and see someone that is not in network. The other side is very much like what your dad dealt with, Grant.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the patient and you're doing your due diligence and you're getting quotes and you're trying to find out, you want just a little price transparency on the front end, and you get an estimate, you get a good faith estimate, and then you get hit with 1,000% increase or something after the fact, then you can basically appeal to this board that will have similar providers that will look at what a reasonable and customary rate is, so that you could actually have that bill cut in half instead of whittling it down yourself. They can look at that and go, yeah, $10,000 for a Band-Aid is not appropriate, or whatever the case is, right? And they would look at what it should be outside of insurance, and then they would come to an agreement. Now, this only happens, this arbitration, this board that's going to like oversee it or, get to the resolution on behalf of the patient, that is only triggered if the person has a good faith estimate. Like if they've done everything that they can, if it's truly a surprise bill.
Yeah, sure.
You go and see someone out of network, you can't just complain about it after the fact. It has to be truly a surprise bill in that instance. That's my understanding of it. Robin could probably, and Representative Smith could probably explain it better than me, though.
Well, and I know one of the things that Reverend Smith told us is that like they did something at the federal level to try to address this, right? But it's some of those things that inevitably fall through the crack at the smaller levels at the state that we're trying to deal with as well. And I think sort of an all-encompassing solution to healthcare. I mean, we're still an option. We don't have to get into the weeds in this, Tori, but obviously there's still an option out there. I presume somehow in this session for dealing with certificate of need stuff as well. Is that something?
Yeah, that's actually up in the Senate next week. I pulled it up, 317. So Senator Shane Reeves has Senate Bill 1281. If you're not aware of what certificate of need is, basically all of the hospitals in the state and a number of other medical facilities in the state, they have to get a certificate of need from the state of Tennessee and say what population. They have to prove that there is enough need in that portion of the state to open a hospital or expand a hospital or open a surgery center. And the kicker in all of it is the competing hospitals or the competing businesses could actually veto privately, put their concerns out there that it could hurt an existing hospital, and they're able to veto someone else from opening up a competing business. It would be like Burger King being able to tell a McDonald's that they can't open up down the street.
Yeah.
That's the shorthand version of why certificate of need is wrong. It's one of those things that the federal government thought in the 70s would increase access and reduce cost. They quickly discovered, and there used to be federal dollars attached to it, they quickly discovered it didn't do that at all. It was actually the opposite. Many states have begun rolling back or completely repealing their certificate of need laws, and they actually have lower cost and improved access. And so this is something that while we would support full repeal, this bill is a significant reform. It makes the process easier. It makes it more public if the competing business or competing hospital wants to shut another one out. It removes the certificate. If someone's had a certificate for, I think it's 2 years and hasn't had an open hospital, as many of you know, many of the rural hospitals have shut down through the years. A lot of these companies still hold a certificate of need, which prevents other hospitals from opening in the same area, which is just completely anti-free market. And it's wrong. Tennesseans are paying the price for it, and it's time to end the con.
Hey, on the way out here, the program as well, just a few of the bills to watch moving next week. Representative Ogles obviously has a bill. House Bill 37 intends to deal with essential, non-essential businesses, what those definitions mean. Should there even be definitions? Really just trying to make it, again, I think that we have a balanced way to approach, say, reopening, or we even be able to define essential, non-essential business. Representative Curcio has a bill, House Bill 888. That bill will deal with the expunction process, getting whatever the word is for the legally innocent individuals. If you've had a no contest, if you've had a dismissal, we think that process should be a little bit easier than it currently is to make sure that gets taken off your record. And importantly, House Bill 409, you'll see this again, the petition you can sign linked in the show notes or in the comments of wherever you're watching right now. House Bill 409 is Representative Lafferty's bill. This will give us vitally important, crucial reporting data on civil asset forfeiture. Right now, we just are unable to tell how often a civil forfeiture ends in a criminal conviction. We desperately need to know that information for obvious reasons. But aside from that, there's also been some pushback as of late from different areas, if you will. I don't want to go into the details right now, but just take my word for it that we may need a little bit more effort, much like House Bill 43 at the beginning of this week. We didn't really see that subcommittee took an hour and 15 minutes without exaggeration. It was literally an hour and 15 minutes that took. I did not expect that bill to be such a major piece of controversy. And I'm telling you, once other areas and organizations and groups and movements start happening, you really can't tell sometimes what's going on behind the scenes. So just make sure we shore that up, sign that petition. On the way out, Tori, anything else that you want to say about any of those bills? Anything else?
One more, House Bill 870 by Clay Doggett, Victims Restitution Reform. I don't know if I don't remember if I brought this up previously, but through our work, we found out, this is so appalling, we found out that when there's an actual victim of an actual crime and restitution is ordered, and say the defendant also has to pay court costs, fines, and fees, the victim, the person who actually suffered the loss, is usually the last person to get paid. So say as the person, the offender, starts paying off their court costs, fines, and fees, restitution is usually the last thing in line. And so that was just absolutely appalling to us that the actual crime victim would be the one who would get their restitution last instead of the state for fines and fees. So it's a pretty simple bill. It puts the restitution at the front of the order so that a victim can get their restitution first, because often they don't even get it at all. And secondly, it also gives them the opportunity to convert it over to a civil judgment. So if the person does actually have assets, they could get their $10,000 back for burning down someone's house or whatever it is, right? So if they could actually get that money back, they can actually get a civil judgment against them at the once the disposition of the case is done and they've been convicted, and when restitution would be ordered. So they would have that opportunity as well. We think it's a good thing. Restoring victims is really a key component of conservative criminal justice reform. And there's so much that has to be done in this area of justice reform. So getting it right and making sure that victims are made whole is definitely a piece of that. And that will be in the criminal subcommittee on 317.
And if you so happen to be watching this in the Tri-Cities area, by the way, our guy out there, Mickey Shelton, you'll find this link. There's some grassroots training that's going to be happening next Friday night, 5 to 7 p.m. and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Incredible training put on by our Grassroots Leadership Academy in conjunction with Mickey out there in the Tri-Cities area. Search this Facebook page, search Mickey's Facebook page for the Tri-Cities area. Find that link. We'll put it also in the comment section here later on. Just so you guys can sign up and get some of that training. And David, buddy, putting you on the spot one more time. Anything you want to say on the way out before we let this thing go? On the way out here, let me just say one more time again, we love each and every one of y'all, everything you do for this community. We love how you're helping us build this community and this new thing we're trying out here in this digital space, trying to build a digital family, right? Getting to know each other. Send us comments. Let us know what's on your mind. Send us bills that you're looking at. I want to know what articles you're reading. I want to know what you're into, how you're living, how you're moving, and how you're hoping to shape this community. And anything you want to hear from us on our end as well. Is there something you'd prefer for us to focus more on, an aspect that Tori may understand, something that you'd like to hear me talk about, something going on in the Knoxville area you'd like to get David's input on the grassroots side, and anything like that, reach out to us and let us know personally. We will see y'all, though, next Thursday, same time, same place. Love y'all. Goodbye.